Corla. First of all, I think this is a very important debate, and I queried the description of this bill as a technical bill at the Business Committee, where it was originally suggested that this bill should be taken all in one go, all three stages in one go, and without pre-legislative scrutiny. The argument that was put forward was that it was a technical bill, and therefore was justified to short-circuit the normal legislative process. Now, to be honest, I think any short-circuiting of the legislative process for almost anything immediately has to raise questions, and answers have to be given. Sometimes it's justified. Sometimes it is justified, Count Corla. I'm not casting aspersions, but we always have to check these things, okay? And to describe a bill that extends the loan capacity of the Irish Film Board by €200 million is not technical. It is definitely not technical. That's a very big decision to expend its loan capacity. I accept that the annual allocation of money is decided as a budgetary matter. But there is no doubt that if you extend the loan capacity of an institution, we've had these discussions with a lot of bodies that we've set up in recent years in particular, state agencies and so on, with loan capacities, they have been scrutinised very heavily. There's been pre-legislative scrutiny, and there's been all the stages necessary to scrutinise and amend bills that deal with that matter. Okay, so to my mind, when you consider that the Irish Film Board, since its inception, has lent out €300 million, and we are now proposing to give it, because it has lent out, I think it's up to about 298 now. So because they've reached the limit, we now have to extend out its loan capacity to €500 million. That is a hell of a lot of money, and it requires serious debate. Now, I accept that given we are so close to the wire, I don't want to push, and I doubt anybody wants to push, the Irish Film Board and consequently the entire Irish film industry over a cliff of no funding, which would be what would happen if we stopped or delayed this bill. However, to be honest, it shouldn't have come to this. Right? This debate should have begun earlier, and there should have been more serious scrutiny of the bill. I welcome the fact that the Government and the Business Committee and the Count Corla and so on did agree to split the debate up into at least two sessions, where we take second stage today and committee and remaining stages on Tuesday, but that only gives till tomorrow to put in amendments. Right, so that doesn't give a whole lot of time for people out there who may be watching this and very interested in what's going on to put in amendments to this bill. There's quite a lot of people watching it, I can tell you that for a fact. There's a lot of interest in what's going on in the Irish film industry at the moment. And let's be honest, there's a lot of dispute about what's going on in the film industry. And we need to resolve it, because the film industry is very important, very important. And as I've said as a preamble to all of my interventions on this issue, which have been quite a number over the last year, I want to see the Irish film industry very seriously supported by the government. I want to see more investment in that industry. I want to see us punch, if like, even more effectively on the international stage. I want us to utilise the enormous talent that exists at a whole range of levels in this country, whether it's writing, directing, producing, the stagecraft of building stages, of making props, of lighting, of wardrobe, of makeup, all of these skills which we have in very significant abundance and which have produced some wonderful successes. many fantastic films, many fantastic actors, directors and so on, who really had a disproportionate impact for a small country like ours on the global stage. So I wouldn't want to do anything but support, promote and strengthen the state support and public support for that industry. And I want to say that before going on to raise some important questions. And has already been alluded to and has been discussed here before. And sorry, the other thing I just want to say to commend the Minister, and not just this Minister, but also the Minister for Finance, in response to some of the issues I've raised, particularly in recent months. I was contacted by senior officials in the Department of Arts, Culture and the Heritage, by revenue officials, by Department of Finance officials, and by the Minister's office itself, the Finance Minister's office, to discuss these issues. And I very much welcome that there seems to be a very serious effort by a number of departments to engage with the concerns that I would have and that have been raised with me in order to get a film industry that works for everybody and that takes us to new heights indeed in terms of film production and all the associated skills. So I welcome all that. But we do have to address the issues, the disputes, the conflicts, the problems and so on in order that the industry does achieve what it could achieve. And there are problems in this regard. And I would say, to cut a long story short, Minister, what we need to do is really get to the facts of what's actually happening in the industry. Okay? And I think there's a bit of a problem there. We're not getting to the facts of what's actually going on in the industry because it would appear, and in a way it's kind of slightly disappointing to me as somebody who is a great fan of the arts, to discover over the last year, as I have with various interactions, that in a creative industry there is ruthless competition. Ruthless competition, which is a little bit disappointing. When you would have hoped there would have been a little bit more harmony and cooperation, there's a hell of a lot of competition. What? A bit like politics, indeed. But you might have hoped in the area of the arts it would be slightly different. So we need to try, to my mind, address some of that. And key to trying to get to the bottom of it, rather than to engage in what has happened, which has been frankly a slagging match of different factions against one another, accusations, counter-accusations and allegations from one sector against another, we need to try and get to the bottom of what's actually going on and resolve the issues. Now, one of the issues that has evolved, but it's very, very important, because it is the condition of Section 481 tax relief. And I'll just read it for the government minister who's come in to replace the arts minister, I hope will be back, is that Section 481 requires that the condition of getting Section 481 is that it acts as, quote, an effective stimulus to filmmaking in the state through, among other things, the provision of quality employment and training opportunities. So the condition of a tax relief that is worth 70 to 80 million euro a year is quality employment and training. Now, the first thing you'd have to do in order to establish whether that condition is being fulfilled, and then on top of the 70 to 80 million that's coming in Section 481, we should stress, is about, I think of the latest figures from the Irish Film Board, is about 16 million in loans. Right? So you've got 70 to 80 million in Section 481 relief, and then, sorry, last year was about 12 million, but it varies between 12 and 15 million. So that's a lot of money. And it's conditional on producing quality employment and training. Now, to ascertain whether that's being achieved, and it is the state's obligation, it is our obligation as public representatives and the various government departments that oversee that, to require, is that happening? It's the law. We need to find out, is that happening? Step one in finding out that is happening is find out how many people actually work in the industry and how many people are trainees in the industry. Registered employees, registered trainees. And we don't really know. The Spy-Olsberg report, for example, how could I say, evolves that, the question or the attempt to answer that question of how many people are involved in the industry. So we go from the January all-party Oireachtas reports, where the Irish Film Board came in and said there are 17,000 full-time equivalents. Many workers came in after and said, actually, there's almost no full-time jobs in the film industry. So we get a claim of 17,000 full-time equivalents, and then we get workers working in the industry who clearly have a record of working in the industry for many years saying there's actually almost no full-time employment for most grades in the film industry. Now, that's a big gap between 17,000 and almost none. So what's the answer? Well, Spy-Olsberg begins to move us a little bit in the direction of answering this question. We discover that the 17,000 figure actually is taking into account radio, video games, commercial advertising, animation, and people who work in RTE, and so on and so forth, right? So actually 17,000 isn't an accurate picture of what's going on in the Irish film industry at all. It's including all sorts of other areas, including people who work in RTE. Right, so now let's get to the truth. How many people working in the film industry? Well, when it's broken down a little bit more, we are told further down in the small print that there's an employment base of 6,300, considerably less than 17,000, and of that, that translates into 3,260 full-time equivalent jobs, full-time equivalents, but full-time equivalents are not jobs. Right? So how many people work in the film industry? Answer, we don't really know. But it's probably somewhere less than or around 3,000, some would say as low as 1,700 or 1,800. Now that's a big, big difference. How many people are trainees? Can we track the trainees? Do we know at what stage of their training? No, we don't, because there is no training structure. Nobody knows when the training begins, how the training is accredited, at what point you're finished training, at what point you become qualified in a particular grade or category of employment within the film industry, which I understand is about 77 different grades and categories in the film industry, just to make it even more complicated. Although a worker showed me there recently that there was actually a register of trainees a few years back where they actually had the names of them. Now I would suggest to the Minister we need the names of the people who are registered trainees so we can track who is a trainee, and are trainees moving from one production to another, progressing through their training and becoming qualified and then having a career in the industry. I think we also need to know who is actually experienced workers in the industry, and are they gaining quality employment? Are the accusations of people being blackballed, if they ask for direct employment, direct PAYE employment, as opposed to agreeing to be categorised as contractors or subcontractors. Now, one of the things that happened recently, allegations thrown around in the primetime special, was for people to say that workers, particular groups of workers, the Irish Film Workers Association and the GMB trade union, who were making the demands for more direct employment in the industry, were in fact a troublemaking faction in the industry who just wanted to control the industry, who were a bit dodgy. Now, I'm not in a position to judge any of that, but I have to say, insofar as I've interacted with those groups, all they've asked for is stuff that I'm very familiar with in the construction industry, which is for direct PAYE employment on the basis that everything else is very precarious. And I want to really say publicly that rather than engage in sort of accusation and counter-accusation, the people in the film industry, and the Irish Film Board in particular, need to be able to explain why it wasn't just IFWA and the Film Board, who said there was an issue of blacklisting, precarity, lack of continuity of employment. This is what the equity representative, and equity, the actors were mentioned earlier on, the equity representative, in a direct response to myself and Mary Louise O'Donnell in January, said this when asked, was there blacklisting in the industry? He said, One need only look at the results of the survey that Equity published at the end of 2016 regarding the issues of bullying and harassment to see what the Deputy is referring to is true. People are terrified of rocking the boat in any way, shape or form when they are in a precarious situation in work. One of the questions surveyed asked whether respondents had ever experienced or observed any form of bullying or harassment. Something in the region of 65% to 70% of people said yes. The next question they asked was if they reported it. Of that 70% of respondents who said yes, roughly 70% said they did not report it for fear of not getting the next job. Okay, that's the actors. And by the way, the Minister might be interested to know, I've been invited, I think she's been invited too, to a thing that's happening next week of theatre actors who are complaining of the same precarity, lack of security and so on that's happening in Stoneybatter, I believe, next week. Okay? So it's not even what are called the creatives in the industry are saying there is a serious problem about this. As well as transport workers, stage crew and so on, people who clearly, whatever accusations may be made against them, have been working in the industry for decades. And they can show what fit productions they've worked on and yet are saying that they are facing blacklisting. And they go further and they say that a relatively small group of companies are getting the bulk of the Irish Film Board grants and loans and the Section 481 tax relief, but that those companies don't take any responsibility for their employees. So they, even though some of them may have had 30 to 40 million euro over recent years in various forms of public support, which I am glad they're getting, but that they have virtually no employees and take no responsibility for the people who work for them because of the SPV structure, which means that their official employer is a company that appears and disappears like a mushroom. But everybody knows that behind that SPV, the disappearing company is actually a parent company who are the ones who actually get the Section 481 tax relief and who have to apply for it. Okay, so this question of who are the employers? You see, you can't have quality employment if you don't even know who the employers are. In fact, if there's no employers because of this SPV structure, so that needs to be established. And I would have thought, following on from that, in order to resolve some of the issues, what you need is a more representative Irish Film Board. Okay, that of course should involve producers, it should involve directors, it should involve actors, but it also should involve PAYE workers, non-management grades in areas like transport, stage crew and so on. So there is a broad diversity of management and non-management grades who actually have an input into the thing. Also, there's a very serious question as to, and Deputy O'Snoddy has referenced this, as to whether or not we need to open up Section 481 tax relief to foreign producers if there is an issue that it is actually hampering internal investment in the country. Indeed, there is evidence, I'm not saying it's true, but it needs to be examined, that some of the big productions that could have come here are not coming here because of the particular way it's set up. And that the structures are different in other places, in Britain and so on. Why did the North get Game of Thrones rather than down here? Okay, there's issues. There's issues in terms of if we've put in 300 million through the Irish Film Board and maybe up to €1 billion through Section 481 tax relief, isn't there something a bit odd that the state has no film assets of its own? It doesn't own any machinery, it just sold off the last bit of the National Studio, Ardmore, to private people. Imagine we had theatre in this country where there was no Abbey Theatre, where there was no municipal theatres, as we have in most places, and it was completely free-floating industry. So the National Theatre became a place that just appeared for a play and then disappeared, with nobody having jobs. Right? We think that a bit odd, wouldn't we? But we are being told by certain sectors of the industry that's the only way you can structure the Irish film industry. I don't accept that for a minute. We had Ardmore Studio, and my God, Ardmore Studio made a big impact on Irish cinema. So these things need to be examined. So I'll just conclude on this, Count Call. I'm glad we've had the debate. It's a very, very important debate. I will be submitting amendments, and they will be along the lines, I'll just warn the Minister now, and it's not a challenge because the Minister is genuinely engaging, as is the Minister for Finance, but I think we need to have a review clause in the bill which says that the issues of employment numbers, quality employment, the reconfiguration, or to include better representation, a more broad, diverse representation on the Irish Film Board, that we need the government to commit to doing those things within a set time frame as a condition of passing this legislation, to address some of the concerns, to try and overcome some of the conflicts, and give the boost and the support to the film industry that it needs to thrive in the future.
Thank you very much. Deputy Joan Collins.